Okay. Well, let me introduce to you Todd Carlson. He served in the U.S. Army from 1986 to 1990 in the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment called the Old Guard in Washington, D.C. He was a sentinel at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier from 1988 to 1989. Let me introduce to you now Todd, and we're so grateful to have you here. It's going to be wonderful.
Thank you. That's loud. So I've got a real quick video to show you. It's about 4.5 minutes long, and then we'll get started.
Veterans, fellow Americans, today we are here to celebrate and to honor and to commemorate the dead and the living. The young men who in every war since this country began have given testimony to their loyalty to their country and their own great courage. I do not believe that any nation in the history of the world has buried its soldiers further from its native soil than we Americans, or buried them closer to the towns in which they grew up. We celebrate this Veterans Day for a very few minutes, and then this country's life goes on. But I think it most appropriate that we recall on this occasion the contribution and the sacrifice which so many men and their families have made in order to permit this country to now occupy its present position of responsibility and freedom, and in order to permit us to gather here together. In an age that threatens the survival of freedom, we join together to honor those who made our freedom possible.
The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is guarded 24 hours a day, 365 days a year by the soldiers of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment. Every year, visitors come from all over the world to pay homage to this sacred shrine, which houses the remains of 3 members of the United States military who sacrificed everything, including their identities, to protect America and the freedom it represents. The soldiers who keep watch over this memorial are called tomb guards, and they stay at their post year-round through the blistering heat of the summer and the frigid chill of the coldest winter months. In order to guard the unknowns, these elite soldiers undergo some of the most intensely focused instruction in the United States Army. During their 9-month training cycle, a vast majority of them will quit, become injured, or fail to meet the standard, leaving only the most dedicated and disciplined left to guard the unknowns. These soldiers endure 26-hour shifts, meticulous inspection and testing regimens, and have to spend almost all of their off time working to keep up with the furious pace of training. After months of rigorous instruction and correction, the men and women who complete the training cycle finally earn their tomb badge and become sentinels. The Tomb Guard Identification Badge is the least awarded badge in the military, and unlike other badges, it can be taken away at any time, even after a sentinel has left the unit or been discharged from the Army. Until now, the traditions and training methods of the guards who protect the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier have been shrouded in mystery. This documentary showcases a unique, behind-the-scenes look at the unbelievable process that these soldiers go through in order to guard the unknowns.
Okay. Check, check. Check. Ooh, that's loud. All right, thank you very much. I'll let him adjust the volume there as I talk, but my name is Todd Carlson, and I'm originally from Idaho. I'm from Meridian. I graduated Meridian High School back in 1986, and I had the distinct honor of spending a very short period of my life with the unknowns. I want to talk a little bit today about the unknowns, and I want to talk a little bit about the journey to become a tomb guard and some of the lifelong lessons that I learned during that process. So I'd like to recite for you the Sentinel's Creed to begin with. This is one of the things that, as a tomb guard, so one of the very first things that you have to memorize. And almost 30 years later, it's still stuck in my brain. I can't get rid of it. So it goes like this. The Sentinel's Creed. My dedication to this sacred duty is total and wholehearted. In the responsibility bestowed on me, never will I falter. With dignity and perseverance, my standard will remain perfection. Through the years of diligence and praise and the discomfort of the elements, I will walk my tour in humble reverence to the best of my ability. It is he who commands the respect I protect that made him so proud. Alone in the thoughtful peace of night, this soldier will in honored glory rest under my eternal vigilance. Words like honor, code, creed, oath, I think in today's world sometimes have lost a lot of meaning. The young men that even as we speak right now are on the plaza guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier live by these words. And it's funny, it's got a funny way of sticking with you during the rest of your life, which has served me well, I think. And before I go any farther, did anybody notice how many Marines stood up and let everybody know they were Marines? Sorry, didn't let that go. I tried to get into the Marine Corps out of high school, but all my test scores were way too high, so they sent me to the office. So, anyway, I'm just kidding, brothers, I'm just kidding. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about my journey. And before I do that, I want to say I speak on this topic a lot. I go to different groups. In fact, this Friday I'm speaking to a group of about 200 executives at Micron. And I'm more honored to be here today with you than I am for that. Because I know when I speak to you guys today, you understand what I'm going to talk about. I doubt that a lot of the executives at Micron are going to really get it. So again, I thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. So 1986, I'm a senior in high school. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I happened to run into an Army recruiter that was slithering around the high school. And he approached me and he said, "Hey, how are you? What are your plans after school?" And like most high school kids, I had no idea. Anyway, this guy talked me into joining the Army. And the way he did it, he says, "Well, what are you interested in?" I said, "Well, I'm interested in music." Thinking that was my get out of jail free card. And he said, "Well, the Army has a band." I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, every Army post has its own Army band." He goes, "You have to audition, but if you're accepted, you get to go in the Army and be a musician and get paid." I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So I actually entered the Army as a trumpet player. So the journey on how you start out as a trumpet player and end up in the most elite military unit in the world is kind of interesting. So I go in the Army. I'm not a tough guy at this point. I don't think of myself as a tough guy. I don't think of myself as a guy that's going to be an infantry type person. But they sent me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for boot camp. And I figured out I really, really like the military. I love the discipline of it. I love the uniforms. Back in those days, you still shined boots and shoes. Today, I think you get issued suede boots or something. I don't know. You have to shine anymore. But I really, really enjoyed it. And it really changed me a little bit. And I did pretty well in boot camp. And then they sent me to the School of Music in Norfolk, Virginia, Naval Amphibious Base. It was a 6-month musical conservatory. And I got there, and my mom was all proud that I was going to go do this thing and be a musician and all this stuff. And once I got to the School of Music, I absolutely hated it. I hated the fact that there was a drill sergeant type person forcing me to practice my instrument. And these drill sergeant type people were actually musicians, pretending to be drill sergeants. And they would yell at you and scream at you and get in your face if you played the wrong note or you missed the beat or something happened like that. And I absolutely hated it. Well, about 3 months into the School of Music, they make you take a test. And they said, boy, you got to practice hard. If you don't pass this test, we're going to put you in the infantry. Well, at this point, the infantry sounded pretty good. So I didn't pass the test at 3 months. And they asked me, hey, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go in the infantry. And they said, you're crazy. Nobody wants to go in the infantry. Well, that's what I want to do. So they transferred me. I got on a motorcycle that I bought against my parents' wishes back in Virginia. And I rode my motorcycle from Virginia Beach to Fort Benning, Georgia. Went to Fort Benning for infantry school. While I'm in infantry school, oh, by the way, I had to call home and tell my parents I failed out of the music program. That wasn't a fun phone call. So, big failure in my life, I guess you could call it. I kind of call it a redirection. End up at Fort Benning, Georgia to go through infantry school. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. About halfway through AIT, they pull us into a big auditorium. And the whole company was in there. And they said, everybody on your feet. So we all stood up, not knowing what's going on, and pretty soon a couple of guys walked out from the back in dress blue uniforms. And this guy started asking questions. And he said, anybody here that has ever been arrested, sit down. Well, shoot, in the infantry, about 3/4 of the room sat down. I'm still standing at this point. And he said, anybody that's ever experimented with illegal drugs or done anything chemically related, sit down. A whole bunch more people sat down. Anybody that is under 6 feet tall, sit down. A whole bunch more people sat down. So I don't know if my other old guard brother here went through this similar process or not. I don't know if they did that back then. But by the time they asked 6 or 7 questions, there's 3 of us left standing. And we still don't know what this is about. So they bring us back into a back room and they say, hey, well, we're recruiters from the old guard in Washington, D.C. It's the Army's presidential escort. It's the most elite unit in the Army. Would you like to be a part of it? Sure. I don't know any better, never heard of the unit, didn't know anything about it. Sounded good to me. So they said, well, you need to keep your scores up, you need to max your PT test, you need to be an expert marksman, you need to do all these different things, and at the end, we'll let you know. Okay. So I didn't really know until we got our orders at the end of AIT. They called my name, told me Fort Myer, Virginia, the old guard. Ended up going up there. And when I first reported in, the barracks there, those of you that have been there, are old colonial style buildings. They're really awesome. They're 2 and 3 level buildings. They're like college dorm rooms inside. They're really nice. But I reported in, they showed me where my room was, and I met my roommate. His name was Corporal Tennant. And I apologize for talking so fast, but I usually do this in an hour, and I got 30 minutes, so I'm going to try to go fast. But I met my roommate, Corporal Tennant, and we got to know each other a little bit. And he said, hey, have you ever seen the change into the guard? I said, what? So I'm embarrassed to say, growing up in Idaho, Meridian High School, I had never heard of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I did not enter the Army to be a sentinel at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So he explained to me what it was, and I go, well, how far away is it? He goes, oh, about 1/4 mile, we'll just walk over. Fort Myer, Virginia borders Arlington Cemetery. There's a small stone wall about this tall on posts that you just hop the fence and you go into the cemetery. So we went, he and I walked over onto Arlington Cemetery, first time I'd been in the cemetery. And obviously if you've been there, it's an absolutely beautiful place. And we walked up to what would be the opposite side of the amphitheater from the tomb. We walked up, and I remember we walked around the right side of the amphitheater, and when we got around to the side, I really don't know what I'm expecting to see, but when I got around to the side, the first thing that came into view was an Army guy standing there, a sentinel. And he was motionless, but he was facing away from me. He was facing Washington, D.C. And then as I kept coming around, then I saw the tomb. Now, I've never seen anybody stand this straight before. So I stood there, we walked all the way around so we could see, and I watched this guy walk back and forth on this mat, 21 steps. He would get to the end of the mat, he'd face Washington, D.C. for exactly 21 seconds. He would then face back down the mat, do a shoulder change with the weapon, and wait exactly 21 seconds. And then he stepped off back down to the opposite end of the map, exactly 21 steps. So obviously 21 is a representation of the 21 gun salute. The Sentinels that are there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, since 1937, are rendering a eternal 21 gun salute to the unknowns. Everything we do is 21. It's ingrained into us. But I watched this, I stood there for about 3 hours watching guard change after guard change, wreath ceremony, guard change, and I literally was standing there with my jaw wide open because I'd never seen anything like this. I'd never seen anybody move like this or act like this, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that were standing there, and it was almost silent. I'd never been around that before. So Corporal Tennant standing next to me, I kind of whispered to him, I said, "Hey, how do you get to do that?" And he said, "Right." He goes, "Forget it." He goes, "You got to be one of the top soldiers in the old guard first, and then somebody's got to either nominate you or somebody's got to ask for you to go down and try out. And if you do try out, the washout rate's 90%. Okay. Didn't think a whole bunch about it, but I put it in the back of my mind. Went off to Delta Company in the old guard. Okay, here's some slides here I want to share as we get to this part. Whoops. Slideshow. If you want to just when I tell you. So we'll go through some slides here in a second, but I want to let you know, obviously right now there's 3 bodies interred at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. One from World War I. And in World War I, we lost approximately 116,000 lives. And back in those days, many of them ended up being unknowns. Because the technology back in those days, we just couldn't identify the bodies. Go ahead. Keep going. These are just some actual photos of the milling of the tomb, which was marble from Danby, Vermont, and the unknown soldier coming home. Go ahead. Originally, the tomb was just like you see it there. There was no die or cap on the tomb. It was just a lower piece. Go ahead. And there was no guard originally when the tomb was first put, November 11th, 1921. Go ahead. World War II, over 400,000 American deaths. Many of them unknown because of the nature of the war and the way things went. Many of them buried overseas. Go ahead. Korean War, right at about 35,000 American lives. There's a Korean War veteran, or a Korean War unknown there also. Go ahead. They did a double interment in 1958 and interred the World War II and the Korean unknown. Go ahead. Go ahead. So these are just some old pictures of some old tomb guards. So let me go back to, I get to Delta Company. And I start my training in Delta Company. And the standard of the Army when it comes to physical fitness, military bearing, and uniforms is, let's say the Army's here. The old guard, and you can attest to this, is about here. Okay, so you got to learn how to strip your uniform apart, your dress blues, polish all your brass, do all these things to where when you're in a public ceremony, you look sharp. Okay, everybody in the old guard was about 6 foot or taller. I think it's because the politicians, when a foreign dignitary came and visited, they wanted us to all look huge. So they'd be afraid to go to war with us, is what we were told. Go ahead. There's also a Vietnam unknown while I was there. When I was there, there were 4 bodies there. Vietnam unknown was one of them. And go ahead. Keep going. So he was identified as an Air Force pilot named Michael Blase. His family petitioned the government to exhume the remains and test it, and it was Michael Blase. And they disinterred him and took him home. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, so the old guard. So I'm in Delta Company, and I'm doing pretty good. I grew a couple inches, you know. I put on some weight, put on some muscle. Was feeling pretty good about myself. A lot of ego, if you know infantry guys. We got a lot of ego. And I ended up being one of the top troops in Delta Company after a while. Go ahead. And also, Sue, will you give me a 5-minute warning too when you get to the end? So I'm in Delta Company. I'm doing pretty good. So my roommate, Corporal Lieutenant, his job was he was a Secretary of Defense guard in the Pentagon. So his job every day, he went into the Pentagon and he stood outside Caspar Weinberger's office in dress blues with a sidearm, and he stood outside at parade rest, and he had to know who you were in order to get into that office. Well, he came home one day after work and he said, I say home, back to the barracks. He came home, he said, hey, the rotation's coming up. Do you want to try out for the Secretary of Defense Guard? I said, oh yeah, that'd be great. So he put my name in, we applied, and they came back and said, well, hey, Tuesday morning at 0600, we're going to have a board. You got to go in front of this board. Okay, great. Well, the night before, I'm getting all my stuff all ready, my uniform's all done, my brass is shined, the shoes are ready, everything looks sharp. It's about 10 o'clock at night, I'm ready to go to bed. And then pretty soon, on my door are all my buddies. Hey, we're going to Georgetown, let's go. Oh, no, I can't do that. I got this big board in the morning, Secretary of Defense duty, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, we're only going to go for a couple hours. We'll be back by 12. Are you sure we'll be back by 12? Oh, yeah, don't worry about it. Let's go. Hence one of the worst decisions I made, but it ended up. Anyway, I went out, got home about 3 a.m. Didn't feel so good. Went to bed, got up on time, got my uniform on, got ready to go, went down to the board and absolutely bombed it. Absolutely bombed it. I couldn't think clear. They're firing questions at you, and I was terrible. And they turned me down. And I remember walking away from that board, going back to the barracks, thinking, man, if I ever get another opportunity like that, I will never screw it up. Well, funny thing is, about 2 months later, we're out on Summerall Field, and we're practicing, doing parade stuff. And my first sergeant calls me over and says, hey, Carlson. He goes, I'm going to send you to the tomb. Now, I'd watched from afar. I'd seen guys go down from other companies to the tomb, and I'd seen them all come back within a month or two. They all failed out. And I would ask them, I said, wow, what could possibly be so hard that you can't make it through that? And they'd look all shell-shocked at me. They'd say, oh, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, what the heck can be so hard? So anyway, I went down, I got ready, got my uniform ready, went down to the board for that interview. Went through that, and I'm standing in an office. It's myself and one other guy standing there named Brad Long, and we became great friends. And the sergeant of the guard's name is Staff Sergeant Shockey. He's standing there and he says, he's asking questions. He gets to me and he says, why do you want to be a tomb guard? Well, me thinking I'm going to ace the question, I said, well, because the tomb guards are the very best of the best, and that's what I want to do. And he stopped and looked at me and made kind of a funny face. He goes, it's not about you. And I kind of heard it, but I didn't really listen. But I passed the rest of it, and I was lucky enough that asked to come down for the first 2 weeks of training. So I went down, and I loved it. It's extremely difficult. If you've seen it, if you've seen the way these guys walk and march and do their weapons manual and do the guard change, it takes months and months of muscle memory to move like they do. There's about 27 pages of information you have to memorize. Word for word, verbatim, with punctuation. Your uniform is beyond crazy standard. The tomb guard standard is perfection in everything that we do. So one of my most favorite times at the tomb is at night. Cemetery's closed, nobody's there, and when you're a new guy, you're not good enough to be up there during the day when there's people, but they'll let you guard at night. And at night it's a 2-hour shift. But you're up there by yourself, and you've been getting yelled and screamed at all day for 24 hours, and you get to go up and be with the unknowns where it's peaceful and nobody's screaming at you. And a funny thing started to happen is you start developing a relationship with the unknowns. It's hard to explain, but I kind of compare it to, if you've got a really close family member that's passed, and you go visit their grave. For us, it's like that. It's a person. It's not a monument. There are people buried there. There are people that left their families, went off to war. Who knows how they died? But they died, they gave their life, and more importantly, they gave their identity. Nobody knows what they did. Nobody knows what happened to them. And after difficult days in training, we would go up at night and you would have conversations with the unknowns. You would talk to them. You didn't verbally talk because we can't talk when we're up there, but you'd have conversations with the unknowns. And you start developing a very close relationship with them. And I know it sounds funny, it's hard to understand, but just trust me, it happens. In the infantry, and I'm sure it's the same in other branches, but you never leave your buddy behind. You never leave a man behind. And the Sentinels being with the unknowns is our way of being with them. We will never leave them. They gave up everything, their futures and their lives and their identities. We will never leave them. But I'm going through training, and of course I called home and told my mom, hey, you wouldn't believe what happened. I'm now at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I'm going to do this wonderful thing, and that's great. Well, about 3 months in, I was beaten down. The reason why the training is so difficult at the Tomb is the standard of perfection in everything that you do. It's not the physical side of it. You can learn to deal with that. It's the mental side of it. It's the not being good enough. You're never good enough. If you're chasing perfection, when do you ever reach it? When do you say you're done? I'm not perfect. It doesn't happen. The reason there's a 90-degree fallout rate is guys, mentally, they just crack. They crumble. They say it's not worth it. It's too much. Now, most of the military schools I went through airborne school and air assault school and a bunch of other schools, and they're all a certain time. Oh, it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks, whatever it is. Mentally, you can go, I can get through that. But at the Tomb, they don't tell you how long training is. It's until you reach the standard. So about 3 months in, I've cracked. I'm done. I'm beat up mentally. I went from being a superstar in Delta Company to going to the Tomb. I'm a piece of crap that can't get nothing right. Now, that's not really what it was, but that was my perception of it. So on one of my days off, we work 24 hours on, 48 hours off. On one of my days off, I go back to Delta Company and I meet my Lieutenant Hamby. And I met with him and I walked into his office and he was excited to see me. We talked for a couple of minutes. He goes, well, how's it going at the Tomb? I go, sir, it's not good. It's not what I thought it was. I think I'd like to come back to Delta Company. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, you have the opportunity right now to do something that almost nobody ever gets to do. He goes, it's a huge honor. He goes, if you give up on this, he goes, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. But I've already given up. Mentally, I'm already out. How many times have we done that in our lives? A lot, usually. But he says, okay, I'll tell you what. This is pretty wise on his part. He was pretty young. He was only a second lieutenant, so he couldn't have been very old. But he says, I'll tell you what, go back for 7 days. If you can make it through 7 days, come back, and you still want to quit, come back and we'll put you back in Delta Company. All right, sir, thank you. So I go back on my next work day and go through the day, normal day, and I got night hours from 12 to 2. So 12 midnight to 2 a.m. is my shift up with the unknowns. And they wake me up. I got a couple hours of sleep. They wake me up. Time to go up, get dressed. The sergeant of the guard gets dressed. We go up. He goes out first. I follow him out. And as I'm walking up there, I've got my M14 in my hands. I'm walking up, and now it hits me. I'm like, I got to tell the unknowns. And so we get up there. We do the guard change. I'm up on the mat. And the guard changes over, Sergeant Guard leaves, the old Sentinel leaves, and I'm up there by myself with the unknowns, and I don't want to tell them. And I know this sounds funny, but I don't want to tell them. So I'm doing my 21s, I'm walking back and forth, and finally I go, guys, again, this is a mental conversation. I go, guys, I talked to Lieutenant Hamby yesterday, and I'm leaving. And, for the first time ever, they talked back to me. And all they said was, don't leave us. And I'll tell you what, in an instant, my entire view of everything changed. And I finally got it. Hey, dumbass, it's not about you. Quit your whining, get through training, and don't leave us. It was literally a split second. I'm standing up there, service cap, dress blues, tears rolling down my face. And from then on, I never, ever questioned it. I never wanted to leave. All the crap that we were going through was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. I went back and all the stuff I've been learning and memorizing was about them. It wasn't about me and my struggles. It was about them. The tomb guards that are up there today, like in my day, or back, even going back to 1937, I'll tell you what, you don't screw with them. Those guys will die on that post for the unknowns. You know, there's a big thing went around the internet a few years ago about the hurricane that came through D.C., and there's all these pictures, and everybody's, oh my God, I can't believe they're standing out there in a hurricane. Well, who wants to be the first tomb guard in history to leave their post? Not me. You know, there's no way you could get those guys off that plaza. There's no way. Those guys would rather give their life than leave that post. That's how dedicated they are. And the reason they are that way is because of the unknowns, because we figured out what that sacrifice was. And we will never leave those unknowns. Ever. There's a bunch of us old fat guys that would be happy to go do it again. They won't let us up there, but we would love to do it again. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some of the symbolism. How are we doing on time? Are we okay? About 5 minutes. Okay. 8? Oh, good. Okay. So there's some restrictions. They're all unofficial, so that the Army can't be called, I don't know what you would call them if you're politically correct. But in my day, you had to be at least 6 feet tall. You had to have a 29-inch waist. So you had to have your dress blue pants on, t-shirt, white shirt, tie, blues jacket, and then a 29-inch belt over the top of that. So we were thin. We were in good shape. You know, you had to have a certain look. I don't know how else to say that, but you had to have a certain look to you for them to want you to be a tomb guard. Like I said, everything's 21 seconds. The weapon is always carried on the outside shoulder away from the tomb. If you watch any video, that's to keep yourself, the weapon between the crowd and the tomb. There's a lot of rumors around about tomb guards and how they're supposed to act. There's an email that went around about 10 years ago that had a whole laundry list of things that tomb guards can and can't do. Almost all of them are correct except 2. You can't drink, wrong. And you can't swear, wrong. But pretty much everything else on that list was legit. So when you're awarded the Tomb Guard Identification Badge, again, like it's actually the second least awarded badge in the military. The first, anybody know what the first is? No. There's more of those. The astronaut badge. So that's the least awarded badge in the military. But once you're awarded that badge, you're bound basically by that Sentinel's Creed that I said at the beginning. And your life duty is to bring honor to the unknowns and not disrespect them in any way by the way you live your life or the way you act. My badge is number 345, and obviously I'm proud of it. There's been 2 Idaho people be guards at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I was the first. 2 years later, a guy by the name of Noah Edney was the second. And as far as we know, those are the only 2 from Idaho. Go ahead. There's a couple other specialty platoons in the old guard I want to touch on real quick. So guns platoon, those are howitzers that they use when the president comes into town or into the cemetery. Go ahead. U.S. Army drill team, much better than the Marine Corps silent drill platoon. Right? Just kidding. U.S. Marine Corps drill team is pretty sharp. Color Guard, Continental Color Guard and Echo Company, those guys are the ones that, these guys are freak shows. These guys are like 6 feet and taller, or 6'5" and bigger. And they're phenomenal. They do all the high profile flag ceremonies. Go ahead. Caisson, an entire platoon by themselves. Very, very honoring and respectful duty. Go ahead. Then of course the Tomb Guards. Go ahead. Qualifications, there has been 3 female badge holders now. When I was there, they would only let infantry guard the tomb. Now they've opened that up a little bit because they've struggled to get enough guys through training. They've opened it up to some MPs and to some other MOSs. Go ahead. The training we talked about, that's an M14 rifle. I've actually got it's actually an M1A that I have up here that I purchased recently just because I miss it. So you're welcome to come up here and check that. It's basically the same weapon except it doesn't have an automatic fire on it. Go ahead. The three parts that we train: the uniform appearance, knowledge, and outside performance. Go ahead. So I want to touch on this real fast. The uniform, to prep my uniform would take me between 7 and 8 hours on the uniform. Every single piece of brass on that uniform, including buttons, are taken off, stripped, and polished to a crazy degree. Everything is pressed. It's insane. But it's, again, the standard is perfection. Go ahead. Go ahead. Testing. We're tested constantly. After the first 2 weeks, you're tested. If you pass that, you get to keep training. You're tested about every month. And if you fail any of those tests, you're sent back. Go ahead. This is Staff Sergeant Welna, who I've actually talked to online quite a few times. Yeah, that's him passing his badge test there. He's a staff sergeant. Go ahead. So the guy in the middle, he's getting his badge awarded. That's his wife. That's the battalion commander on the left, and the command sergeant major on the right. That's Jeff Stitzel. He's actually an old tomb guard. He was a new man when I was there. I helped train him. He stayed in the Army, obviously. Go ahead. This is an old picture back from, I think it's in the 30s, that one. Go ahead. Go ahead. Anybody else hear any myths or rumors about the tomb that you want to ask? We'll try to wrap up with a few questions. Any questions? Go ahead. There's a couple pictures on here I want to show. Keep going. So obviously, regardless of the weather, the only times that were really bad, snow wasn't a big deal, but at night when it was like 0 degrees outside, that was a little bit uncomfortable. Go ahead. There's a storm rolling in. That's actually me, 1988. That was actually a really fun day. Go ahead. That's me the next spring. A little thinner back then. You know, when you talk about perfection, look at the back of those pants. You know, I mean, that's just every day. That's how you got to be. Go ahead. This is one of my favorite pictures. And again, you know, we talk about being up there at night or in the early morning before there's a crowd there. Just being with the unknowns, it's unreal. Go ahead. Go ahead. So in my talks, I always talk about Jeff Davis. Jeff Davis was one of my trainers. He was a Sergeant E5. He just got back from Ranger School. This guy was a tomb guard already, badge holder. He just got back from Ranger School. He trained me. He was one of the best leaders I ever had. Ever. Even today, in the civilian world included. And he re-enlisted, and he went Special Forces. So he got his Special Forces tab. He did that for an entire enlistment. While he was in Special Forces, he finished college. When he got his degree, he went aviation. He became a Black Hawk pilot. So he's a tomb guard, Ranger, Special Forces, Black Hawk pilot. He was in a training accident and was killed. And his daughter right there now, that's current, his daughter was 3 at the time. And, you know, some of these, there's been a few tomb guards that have been killed in action or killed in combat. It is, you know, it just goes to show all of these American servicemen that go off to war, they're our nation's best. You are our nation's best. And I want to finish with that. Jeff was a great guy. I want to continue his memory and his legacy. And I want to thank you very much for having me. I hope you pick something up today. Thank you.
Well, I hope, Jeff, thank you so much, and I want to give you a gift for the war veteran, our coin. So thank you. So how many of you have wondered how do those guys do it? And you stand there and see that. Boy, I've always wondered, and now you've answered so many questions. Truly, thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, any questions that you have, come up and ask. And what an experience this man had. I loved the part about becoming attached to the unknowns and hearing them in his head, because I'm sure that's exactly what happened. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And by the way, I have one more guy that's brand new. Sorry, I didn't catch him, but I can't.